Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is the 30th of May 2025, a Friday. And as I make this video, Bitcoin is trading at just under 104,000, and Kaspa is trading at a little bit above 9 cents. And in this video today, we're going to be talking about a new way of looking at what are good buying points and sell points for cryptocurrencies. This is adapted on different works that people have done and some of my own evolution of my own thinking. And it involves use of something called a risk metric, a value between zero and 1, that tells us whether it's a good time to buy, relatively speaking, for a particular crypto. And to start off, we'll do a review on what we did for the Power Law Investor, in which we're using the Power Law following assets. And we get a little bit of perspective, and then I'll show you what the results for the newer way of looking at this are and why I decided to use it and why I think it can be a useful addition towards understanding when is a good time to be buying and when is not such a good time to be buying. Okay? So a quick review, and again, this is not financial advice, right? So do your own research. A quick review is that we know that there are a couple of assets in the cryptocurrency space that seem to follow the power law very rigorously. Now, Bitcoin is the best example of that. If you take a log of the time since Genesis on the x-axis and the log of the price on the y-axis, you find that you get this blue line over here. And the trend line for this using a linear regression gives us a very high degree of fit, as evidenced by this R-squared value of 96%, which means that 96% of the variation in the blue line is explained by the orange line, the trend line, and it has this particular equation. Now, when we take this line and we convert it into linear space, which is what we're normally accustomed to dealing with, we end up with something that looks like this, a line that is curving upwards, representing the trend, and it's a mathematically derived trend. It's not something based on what someone has been saying or their opinion. And you can see that the blue line sort of follows that, right? Occasionally we get above that. Every 4 years we seem to get to a point where we go way above the orange line. That would, following the same sort of pattern, we would sort of see this at the end of 2025 also. So we would expect to see a significant deviation of the price above the trend line, but it does follow this trend line as a whole. And if we believe that the future is like the past, we can use that to estimate what sort of returns we would be getting. And doing that for Bitcoin gives us an anticipated price in about a year's time of 164K, representing a return of about 57% from where we are today, which is a pretty good return. Similarly, Kaspa is a cryptocurrency in the altcoin space that also follows the same sort of line, the same sort of mathematics. The duration of days that it's been active for is much lower, about 1,100 days versus 5,500 days for Bitcoin. But it has the same sort of trend that the price, if you take the log, if you plot it on the log axis, you find that there is a strong trend line. And in this case right now, it's explaining 88% of the behavior, so not as good as Bitcoin. Previously, till about September last year, it was doing a much better job of following this trend line. Then it had a particular drop. So just for argument, if you do believe that the trend line represents the best estimate of which direction you think the prices are going to go in, we can again do the same sort of calculation, and we end up with an estimated price in a year's time for Kaspa of about 68 cents, which represents a 650% return, which is fantastic. However, worrying for those of us that have been investing in Kaspa is that from about September last year, the price has not really been following the trend line. You can see sort of just dipped considerably below this trend line over here. And for that reason, many of there've been thoughts that, oh, it stopped following the trend line. Will it ever come back to the trend line? Those are questions that we can't answer until we get more data. But it got me thinking that are there other ways to try and figure out if it is a good time to be buying Kaspa or not. If you believe in the power law, you sort of saying like, okay, whenever it goes below the orange line, it's a good time to buy. And the more it goes below the orange line, the better it is that we should be buying, right? And so we can DCA in, let's buy a certain amount, $100, $10, $20, whatever it's every day, but increase that as the price drops down. But in this case, we've had this sort of rather significant deviation, and it is uncertain that whether it will come back to following the trend line or not. And so for this, I have been sort of experimenting with different approaches to try and find a better way rather than only relying on the power law to figure out how when that's a good time to buy this. And so I believe I have come up with an idea that is giving us sort of good results on how this might proceed, right? And this graph over here, we're basically looking at deviation from the power law over here. Okay. So what you're saying is, okay, this is the yellow line over here is the price, and this pink line over here is what I'm calling a risk metric. And this risk metric jumps between 0 and 1, and it's represented on this left axis over here. The closer it is to 1, meaning that it is relatively overbought, that means it is a risky time to buy relative to the past performance. The price is now quite high. And when it gets closer to 0, it essentially is saying it is relatively a good value at this point. And these are all examples of what we would call mean reversion strategies, meaning that we believe it's going to go back to a trend line, right? And so this is what sort of a risk metric based on a power law might look like. So you can figure out quantitatively how far has it deviated from this trend line and whether it's a good deal to buy or not. Of course, we have to believe that it's going to mean revert, that is go back to the mean at some point, right? This is using the power law. But we can also use different versions, different ways to try and find trends on this. Here's one trend that's something that I've been working, and you'll see that it's sort of giving us rather interesting results. It's not depending on the power law, it's a different variation of something that I've designed. And we can see that the risk metric generated here, let's just hide the signals to make it clearer, is that it's along this particular trend line over here that I've come up with through a lot of back testing and some extensive coding that I've done. And it sort of gives us this value between 0 and 1. And it's not so clear in this chart, but you will be able to see a much better example of it here with these colors. So without colors, this is the price of Kaspa from 2022 to today. But once I turn on these risk metrics, you can see that using this sort of technique, the risk metrics range again from 0 to 1. The redder it is, the hotter it is, meaning the price is really hot, so it's not such a good time to buy. And the bluer it is, the colder it is, so the better time it is to buy. You can see that it's doing a fairly good job of telling us where these peaks in price are and when are good opportunities to buy. Now, just looking at this from a cursory perspective over here, you can see over here that the risk is around 27, like 0.27, right? Let's just call it 27. Over here, which means it's not absolutely bottom compared to where it's been before. And the way this risk metric works is that it looks back upon the history of that particular asset and then bases the colors based on the price performance. And it's not a retrospective metric as in I'm looking at today's value and then color coding them backwards. These are in the moment values. So if we were implementing this algorithm on May 3rd, 2024, this is the value that it generated. Risk of 0.277. This is different from what other people have done. Sometimes they'll go back and then look over the entire history to get a perspective, which I don't think is the right way to do it. What we want is a genuine way that says, what is the value this particular algorithm is generating with the data that we've seen so far, rather than all this data in the future that I'm going to know, right? So this is kind of different from what I believe other people have done. And you can see, yes, it goes blue over here, so it's saying it's a relatively better time to buy, and it goes up to the yellow section over here, which is a risk of about 0.5 in the middle. And again, we start seeing a lot of blue coming down, right? Now, this metric doesn't look into the future, right? This is, again, we can't predict the future. This is a backward-looking risk metric, meaning it's looking at the previous history. So for this point, it's looking at all what's happened in the past. And then based on that, it's coming up with one number, which is saying, is this a good time to buy or not? So over here you can see that it does a great job of identifying the local minimum, right? It's saying like it's become extremely blue right now. The price is 0.10 or is 10 cents. And the risk metric here is 0.147. That means it's quite low, right? It means it's pretty a good time to buy it. That's exactly what happens as the price does go up after some period of time. And then again, we see that we get some light blue over here, and then finally we start seeing dark blue over here when the price is around 8 cents. And then again, the price comes down here to 7 cents, and the price comes down here further to 6 cents over here. So it's quite blue. Okay. And what this allows us to do is that it gives us an alternative to the power law that tells us is it a relatively good time to buy based on what we've seen so far historically for that particular asset. Now, it's not going to predict the future. I can't tell you what the price of Kaspa tomorrow is going to be like. All I know is this is the price of Kaspa right now, over 9 cents. I don't know whether tomorrow it's going to be 8 cents or it's going to be 15 cents. But what I can say, based upon the historical performance of this asset and this particular algorithm, is it a relatively good time to buy, right? And how risky is it? And what this is telling us right now is that we're looking at sort of a risk factor of about 30s over here in this section over here. So it's just beginning to turn blue. So 0.386, which means it's an okay time to start dipping our toes in, but not really the best time. It's not a super deal right now. Super deal was here when it came to about 6 cents over here. Again, relative here, based on what we had seen so far, 9 cents was also a pretty good deal. Sort of, again, it's not a perfect risk metric, but it is telling you, based on what we've seen so far, how good of a deal is it right now, right? And so this is what sort of this graph is not very well. What the different risk levels would be. Right? So right now we're looking at about somewhere between 0.3 and 0.4, which is not a bad time to buy. But really, based on the patterns that we're seeing so far in the historical context, the super deals would come around 6.5 cents and below, right? That's when this starts turning this dark blue over here. The risk metric ends up being into between 0 and 0.2, which are great times to buy. And so I don't know what's going to happen with the crypto market, especially the altcoin market. My suspicion is that we are going to see a lot of volatility. What else is new? But I do think that we are going to see Bitcoin outperform until we get quantitative easing in a more formal sense. You know, already there have been sort of monetary injections into the system, and you've sort of seen some pulses for the altcoin market. But I think as a whole, Bitcoin is probably going to be the winner until we see that transition of Bitcoin starting to peak and the altcoin market really starting to rip when quantitative easing starts. Now, calling that exact timing is going to be difficult, but the risk metrics here can help us prepare for that. So what I would say right now in the strategy going forward is continuing to be of DCAing in. And as the price drops down further into these different risk metric levels, I'll consider increasing that DCA more. So right now it's at $300 a day, and I'll make an updated video on where we are with that. But as the price drops down, it becomes a better deal, right? And I think this risk metric over here and the way that it's done gives us a good visual indicator, and also relies with what I've seen intuitively as good times to buy, because the power law for Kaspa is not really effective at this point, because we've fallen down so far. It's sort of become a little meaningless. It's definitely in the buy zone, but within the buy zone, we need to have more variations of what's a good time to buy and what's not a good time to buy. And the power law is a much longer term metric. So we have to find something that's going to be working on a shorter time scale and gives us better opportunities to buy. So this is something that I've been working on. It's being refined, coming through, but this is fairly close to the final form and what I'll be using for my investments going forward. But you can see that it's done a good job of identifying when it becomes a great deal And we can see here in particular, right, around this time over here, around 6 and 7 cents and 8 cents, it was really sort of screaming below 0.2, saying, hey, this is a good time to buy based on what we've seen so far. So again, these are what the risk metrics look like right now. And I think it's telling us right now that, hey, we should start buying. We don't know whether it's not at a super deal right now. We're between 0.3 and 0.4, but as we go further down, and if we go further down, definitely a good time to increase the allocations. So I hope this is useful. I'll be starting to add this amongst my videos and the metrics I normally use to sort of come up with my weekly updates, but wanted to share that with you, and that's all for now. So if this is useful, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you find out when the new videos are coming up. And do comment below if you find this useful and what would help enhance your enhance your understanding with this particular risk metric. So all the best, cheers, and see you on the next one.